Okay, so we're gonna get started now. Thank you all for coming out tonight to yet another wonderful meeting of the FSU chapter of the International Association of Emergency Managers. Tonight, our speaker will be Allison McLeary. She recently served as the Recovery Bureau Chief for the Florida Division of Emergency Management. She currently serves as the Director of Disaster Recovery Programs of Tetra Tech, a private sector firm. She's done a lot of other cool things too. She's served as, Executive Counsel to the Louisiana Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, Program Manager for FirstNet in Louisiana, and also as an attorney for the Louisiana State Board of Private Security Examiners. She graduated with Doctor of Law and Bachelor of Civil Law from Louisiana State University and a Bachelor of History from Auburn University. We're so glad that she is here with us tonight. She's going to speak on the recovery process, the leadership role she played through the FDEM Recovery Bureau, as well as the private sector's role in the recovery process and what she currently does with Tetra Tech. And so, Allison, thank you so much for being here tonight. And I now pass the floor over to you. Well, my camera just died, but that's okay. So go for it.
No, thanks for having me, guys. I love talking to groups like this, our future emergency managers and disaster recovery executives. And so I love the opportunity. So thank you. Thanks for the good intro. That is kind of what I've done in a nutshell. Kind of had a non-traditional route to emergency management. When I started, I don't think I'm that old, but when I did start 20 years ago in this, as emergency management as a specific field or degree program or anything like that was pretty rare. And so kudos to my ACC brethren, for really leading the way in that. As you saw or heard, I'm a SEC girl for the most part, but just obviously spent the last couple of years in Tallahassee. A great appreciation and respect for the program that Florida State has developed there and that you guys are a part of. So it's a good history. I hired lots of grads over the last couple of years. We grew with leaps and bounds at DEM over the last couple of years, and there's no doubt we'll continue to do so. So for those of you who are interested in staying in Tallahassee, I know there's going to be great opportunity there for you, for those of you graduating in the near future. But also in the private sector. And I like that I can now talk about that perspective, because after 20 years in state government, I'm new to private sector world. It's been a little over a month. And so I can give you some great perspective and about some of the choices that some of you are about to make in your career. So I did start right out of law school with the Louisiana State Police. Chose law school knowing what kind of law I wanted to practice. And my last year of law school, interned at the Louisiana State Police and really enjoyed it. Just so happened the first year I was out of law school was 2004, 2005. And for those of you who know, that was the year that Louisiana experienced Katrina and Rita. And so Louisiana State Police obviously took on a much broader role than they ever had in the history of any disaster in the state of Louisiana. And so I ended up being the legal counsel to what they then called the crisis response section. And so they weren't sure what that was going to be yet. They just threw maybe 2 troopers into a section and assigned them over to the state EOC and said, figure it out. And yours truly was the youngest attorney on staff. So they threw me out there with them. But we made it through Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. I was in the State Emergency Operations Center for about 4 months. Right after Christmas, we ended up kind of going back to semi new normal. But in the meantime, was legal advisor in the EOC to the response and coordinated out-of-state assistance. One of the probably to date, one of the heaviest uses of the EMAC program, the Emergency Management Assistance Compact program in the country, and that the country had ever seen. And I've probably sworn in about 4,500 out-of-state law enforcement officers to help with the state of Louisiana in that response. So that was a heck of a first year, heck of a way to start in emergency management. But it was great experience. So that's just how I kicked it off, believe it or not. And so I did 10 years at Louisiana State Police. Happy to answer any questions about that experience to you guys. I realized it was an iconic kind of period of time. But after that, I actually did transition to manage FirstNet. So again, one of those, baby lawyers get all of the good assignments. they also assigned me as to the communication section. And so as all of you I know have learned, if you can't communicate with one another, you can't properly respond to a disaster. And so big lesson learned after Katrina, lost lots of communication towers, but got lots of funding, got FEMA in mass, and we were able to utilize that funding to really build out one of the nation's largest statewide radio communication systems. And so with that experience, was the FirstNet program manager. So really pivoted to directly supporting and understanding the needs of local first responders. So for two and a half years, all I did with an outreach coordinator is try to meet with every fire chief, police, sheriff, ambulance company, ambulance service to try to just assess their communication needs. And so the feds after 9/11 had really tried to fix the communication issues in the country, and threw a lot of money and some very valuable spectrum at the problem, but never quite had gotten some momentum. And so with FirstNet, as you now see on every commercial and every AT&T store has, AT&T, our FirstNet brought to you by AT&T, that was a result of that effort. Really, we helped figure out what first responders needed. We put it into a request for proposals, and AT&T ended up winning that partnership opportunity. And so it's built out. So just really great things. Transitioned directly back into emergency management after that. So in 2016, we had a large scale flooding event, just an odd non-tropical event in the capital area, Baton Rouge, and really flooded, to half of one parish and about 3/4 of the other neighboring parish, and really was a huge event. And they brought me back into the truly emergency management role after that as legal counsel to the governor's office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, directly advising about recovery, just developing, liaison to FEMA, liaison to the locals, helping with subject matter expert with policy and law and guidance and regulations. Because as FEMA really loves to do after a big event, they issue a bunch of event specific guidance, just tweaking all of the rules just enough to make it more difficult. So did a lot of that for those couple years, and got to be a real subject matter expert in public assistance. And so when Florida experienced Hurricane Michael, now almost 2.5 years ago, they sent a team of 6 of us from Louisiana to help. The Florida Division of Emergency Management was going through a lot of change at that point and staffing challenges. And so as states often do, they reached out, and we had already developed that relationship with some of the leadership at DEM, obviously through NEMA. We at just NEMA conferences, our leadership had met the leadership in Florida, and when they needed help, it was literally a phone call away. And so 6 of us from Louisiana came over the 2 days after hit and stayed for a few months, and just helped be advisors to them, to locals in the field. And we would drive through rural county and stop at churches and basically say, "Hi, friend, looks like you have some damage. You realize you're eligible for FEMA now?" So kind of got thrown into that. And as a result, Florida made me an offer to stay. And so I actually stayed, accepted a position with the Florida Division of Emergency Management. My boss in Louisiana and I still would text all the time. And so it's a small community, as you guys will understand and hopefully experience. There weren't any, there was definitely not bad blood. He knew I was still a phone call away. He was, one of us being able to help in Florida, and between Florida, Texas, Louisiana, and California, we have the lion's share of declared events. And so it's nice to be able to develop those relationships. And so stayed in Florida for 2 years, ended up, being chief of recovery, managed about $10 billion in FEMA PA back to 2004. And I always say the reward for hard work is more work. So we, because we did a really good job getting out some of those FEMA dollars to those local governments. They gave us $700 million in USDA block grants to help citrus farmers after Irma, and foresters in the Panhandle after Michael with crop loss. And then about 1.2 billion in CARES money in the last year as well. So large counties and large cities got a direct allocation from Treasury of a lot of that CARES money to help with COVID response and recovery. But the 55 smaller counties in Florida, they were relying on the state to pass through some money for them. So the governor's office earmarked about $1.2 billion for those small and medium counties, and that was administered through my office last year. So it was fun. It was a lot. I think I'm just now kind of y'all about vaccinations and all that. I'm fully vaccinated and trying to get back out there and rejoin the real world from the EOC world. I'm a little pale, I'm a little heavier, I'm a little, but we'll all get back there eventually. Yeah, and about, and without definitely looking for the opportunity in the private sector, that's sometimes the best opportunity for you. And so through a colleague, Tetra Tech came to me. And you'll see this a lot. There are these large engineering firms in the country. Tetra Tech's about 20,000 employees and publicly traded out of California. And there's a few others that are just really large. They do huge wastewater and nuclear programs and just all around the world. But they have a great disaster recovery practice. It was a kind of a good fit for some acquisitions a few years ago, and they saw the volume of money and work happening in this space that a lot of them branched out. And so Tetra Tech has about 1,000-person disaster recovery practice. They're traditionally debris monitors. They work in the debris space a lot, but I'm hoping to branch them out more and more into comprehensive grant management and help with that. And with this most recent funding, guys, this is a game changer. You guys are really going to be joining the workforce in emergency management and disaster recovery in a really unique time that I've never seen so much money available in the space to state and local governments to really make a difference. And so not only the first round of CARES, but what they did with the Consolidated Appropriations Act at the end of last year, creating rental assistance programs, eviction prevention programs. We're administering rental assistance programs all around the country, including Harris County, state of Connecticut, Greenville, South Carolina, Mobile. And it's tens of millions of dollars into these communities. I was on a call with Harris County last week, which is Houston, Texas. And they really see the next round of funding, the 1.9 trillion that was passed about 3 or 4 weeks ago, as transformative. I mean, they were using terms like once in a lifetime opportunities and transformative amount of money flowing into these communities. And the private sector, really, they're tapped out. These cities, when you have any kind of disaster event or pandemic event like COVID, and then Houston experienced, the winter storm iced over for a week solid. And so a big declared event where there's lots of infrastructure damage there. And then you put another, 500 million, actually they're getting $931 million on top of that. They just reached maximum capacity, or their lack of capacity now shows, they're a big, capable, big city, big metro county. And just with another influx of money, which is great, but it does take brains and does take people to manage and administer those grant programs. So that's really where a lot of us who came up through the public sector still have a service-oriented heart and really a passion for this. Those of us in the private sector really can serve a good role in that time frame. We really can go and be force multiplier for them, do some good things, but help them set their priorities, and then help them get those programs off the ground and get them working. And we can just bring in the volume that they can. I mean, we literally can drop in 100, 150 fresh bodies to help supplement them and their very tired staff, to administer these new funds. We said they'll be getting half of their money, these local governments, in the next 30 days. So Houston will literally, it just passed, it was signed, President Biden signed it on the 11th. They'll get it within 60 days of enactment. they'll get half of their money right off the bat. So they'll get literally in their account $465 million just to go and do good things. And a lot of this new money has so few strings. We're used to, in FEMA world, there being so many rules and regulations and requirements and reporting. It really comes with very few strings. And so that's exciting in a lot of ways, but you do have to help them really develop a good comprehensive compliance strategy and risk assessment and risk aversion kind of strategies for them to help administer them in the right ways. So it's an exciting time. Just would love to see if you guys had questions. I know I've kind of come into emergency management through a different path, but would love to answer questions or share my experience with you guys.
Sure. My video wants over, there it is. The team that came over from Louisiana, that you were part of, did that also include a guy named Randall Hart?
It did.
Oh, okay, yeah, because I did a remote internship with FDEM this past fall. I helped out with insurance stuff. Randall, being the insurance lead, was my supervisor, and he told me that they FDEM, like as he worded it, they poached him from Louisiana.
That was me.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, no, yeah, he was hyper knowledgeable about, insurance stuff when I interacted with him, and that was an interesting story. So yeah, I was just curious about that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Randall. I didn't want to take too many, coming over from Louisiana, but Randall was the most knowledgeable person I've ever known about insurance in the disaster space. And so, yep, he and his wife both, they moved to Wakulla County, and actually he had his first child this morning. So just to pass that along to you.
Oh, wow. Congratulations to them.
But yeah, so he came over with me, and actually one other, our closeout lead, actually moved from Baton Rouge to Tallahassee as well. So stole some good ones.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, he had quite a zeal for insurance that you don't see in most people, I think.
Yeah. And bless his heart, he started reviewing debris load tickets for the city of New Orleans, validating that after Katrina. And so literally, and those were paper tickets for each load of debris pulled out of Orleans Parish. And so,
wow.
Yeah, he started in the thick of it, and now he's really setting insurance policy for the whole country, really.
Oh, wow.
One of the big things that, it doesn't sound so exciting, but if it's, if a city gets $100 million in FEMA aid, to rebuild city halls and libraries and things like that, FEMA really expects you to carry insurance for that peril for the full amount of what they gave you. And so now all of a sudden you're having to maybe buy a lot of insurance that you didn't have to or didn't before this event. So it really is a huge, it can almost darn near bankrupt some cities. And so there's an interesting concept of an insurance commissioner can certify like what's reasonable. If you go to them and you say, man, if I really had to buy everything that FEMA is making me buy, it would be 40% of my budget, 50% of my budget would be insurance costs. And so FEMA does allow you to get with your insurance commissioner and kind of set what would be reasonable. So if you go and you just present your budget, your pre-event budget, current budget, and kind of what FEMA's requirements are, your insurance commissioner can say, you know what, FEMA, really, 20% cap is really what's reasonable here. They spending more than 20% of their budget on insurance, and FEMA will accept that. And so, but it's a hard process, and it's a good one. And Randall's going to start fighting that fight for a lot of cities and counties in Florida, especially after Irma. There were just some large amounts and a lot of damage. So
right, definitely. And I was curious, when you were counsel to the Louisiana governor's office, which governor was that? Was that Bobby Jindal?
It was Jindal, and then the very first part of John Bell Edwards.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Jindal was
governors.
Jindal was quite the character. Yeah, that is quite the contrast between them. Yeah, definitely.
And Governor Scott actually had a lot of Jindal staffers come over, believe it or not. So I saw a lot of very familiar names from the Jindal administration come over in the Rick Scott administration.
Oh,
wow. Really, really small world. Really small world there.
Oh, for sure.
But now we have we're one of the few southern states. Louisiana's one of the few southern states with a Democratic governor now. So
right.
Yep.
Well, I have some more questions, but I want to open the floor up to, everyone else. Ask away, guys. Don't be shy.
Oh, I do actually have a question. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Allison, for coming and talk to us. It's really awesome to have you here. But one of the questions that I have is I was just wondering, just from your perspective, how much money are like small and medium-sized counties, just in your experience, how much money are they leaving on the table, or are they leaving any money on the table, in terms of aid?
So I really don't see them leaving money on the table. I think that we would really help them provide that technical assistance as far as them learning what all is eligible. And believe it or not, the Florida Association of Counties and the Florida League of Cities are good partners for them in that. And so even at the very beginning, we hosted webinars in conjunction with the Florida Association of Counties, just to make sure they understood what they were getting, the timeframes, and what was eligible. Actually, a colleague and I spent the majority of our time for probably a couple months talking to consultants that some of these counties had hired, and that's fine. And to the counties and county attorneys and county managers, and just helping them understand what they can spend this money on. And so we are seeing a lot of them did use it for paying their public safety costs related to COVID. So especially CARES, all of a sudden a county, Calhoun County, would get an extra, $10 million. And they didn't understand that they had really $10 million in COVID related response costs. But we helped them understand what all would be eligible. And a lot of them ended up using the money to basically backfill a lot of their public safety expenses over that year, and which was totally allowed. And so once you freed up a lot of those costs, then they could further fund, mitigation measures at libraries. I mean, we got really creative with some of that, touchless water fountains in schools and public facilities. Some things, FEMA really limited eligibility of a lot of mitigation measures early on. They just saw themselves as they couldn't bankroll it all. They really couldn't. And so they did limit eligibility of a lot of those mitigation measures and pushed it to that CARES funding. So the more traditional FEMA claim will be, your EOC and true response costs. And then all of those more generally related to COVID kind of costs, like barriers and stickers on the floor and temperature scanners and things like that were those CARES funding. So, I mean, a lot of people, might think of contractors or, private companies helping a lot of these counties as being a little opportunistic at a time when they need it. But really, you really bring the expertise to help them identify stuff like that. And a lot of times you're just paid for by the administrative costs allowed for in the grants. So almost every grant program writes into the program that, mostly up to 10% is general rule of thumb of the grant can be used to administer the grant, so you have these people who are actually helpful and can help make sure, that even the smallest counties and cities spend that money. So what we are seeing is FEMA has been extremely overwhelmed and very slow to obligate funds. So a lot of these counties have presented some truly clearly eligible expenses, and FEMA just hasn't written the projects yet or sent the money. So, just helping them prioritize things. If I keep going back to a Calhoun County, but if a Dixie or all of a sudden to see, they had $8 million in expenses and it's eligible for 5 different grant programs, that's an experience that they've never had before. And so helping them be able to timelines and what's eligible. It was difficult, and it continues to be, but they're doing it. I don't see a lot of them. Some of them, there's one county, and I will not say the name of the county, but there is one small county who just isn't going to fully utilize all of the federal funding out there. And there's still hope for them. A lot of these timeframes have been extended by this most recent law appropriation. So hopefully someone will help them figure it out.
Well, thank you so much for enlightening me and all of us. That's really actually gratifying to hear the public sector or the private sector helping the public sector understand all the programs that are eligible, and that's one of the elements of emergency management I haven't fully thought about. It's just the sheer educational applications that you can impart to different levels of government. But thank you so much for that response.
You'll find this interesting, James. The city of Minneapolis actually put out a request for proposals recently for community navigators. And that's the term of it. And it's truly just outreach to all the small municipalities within Hennepin County, just to make sure that they're aware of exactly that, aware of all that's available to them, and help them navigate the grant world out there right now. So.
Yeah, thank you. Community navigators they're called, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That sounds really interesting. I absolutely love talking to people. I'll be fully vaccinated, so I'll be out and pounding the pavement again. So yeah, maybe that's something I'll apply for somewhere. Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
Hi, I'm Alex Griffin. I'm part of IAEM, but I also just joined Haggerty Consulting as a junior associate. And so obviously, I think all of us have been reading some literature about how kind of the hiring crisis within emergency management, and like we're seeing greater amounts of money than we've ever seen, and greater amounts of kind of administrative burdens that have to be taken on, but we don't necessarily have a greater workforce or a greater influx of people with knowledge of like for recovery PA and individual assistance. So how do you think as an industry we kind of counter that issue? Because I think I read something about it over the weekend, and I'm kind of seeing it firsthand, like Haggerty is just hiring like crazy. And
so are we. And we actually at DEM, I had hired Haggerty. Haggerty was helping actually DEM develop DEM projects for COVID. So they're a great company, and you'll really like that team. But really all of us are. I mean, Tetra Tech also is just, we have 200 open right now that we just are actively filling, but we had to bring on extra recruiters just to be able to handle the influx of, or to handle the need. Really get out there, and we're doing virtual job fairs and things like that. So it's definitely a real thing. There's a lot of opportunity out there. And, you know, we saw it after large events like Hurricane Sandy, Hurricane Katrina. You know, you do see a lot of hiring and an increase in need. And sometimes that's a little short-lived. But I don't think that's going to happen now. I really think that emergency management, disaster space has changed. And I think that the funding levels that we're seeing now, I mean, some of the funding in the American Rescue Plan Act is all the way through 2027. So the mortgage assistance is through 2027, rental through 2025. We're seeing more and more declared disaster events, just FEMA PA, you know, FEMA traditional PA and IA events than we ever have before. So I think it's sustainable. I don't think that any of the jobs that you get will be short-lived, if that's ever a concern. But I think that you will all have opportunity as long as you could want to. It's really your choice of kind of the area that you want to practice in, both geographic and which practice area. I think that we're seeing more and more money flow into mitigation, so into BRIC, you know, and really the transformation and mitigation programs. So there's a longer term aspect, obviously, to those mitigation programs. So I really see it's sustainable. What I did at DEM is, and I recognize that you guys are more traditional emergency management, candidates or hires, but really I see there being value in less traditional applicants such as myself, coming at it from the legal world. I hired a couple of CPAs, a couple of new graduates in accounting, auditors. Compliance is a huge aspect of it. So I think that, and I had great success with those kind of non-traditional EM candidates as well. So I think that people in other disciplines, engineering, accounting, auditing, just who maybe have never considered disaster recovery as a career should. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And I think outreach to those less traditional just bases would help us fill a lot of that need and fill it really successfully. I mean, managing $10 billion takes more than just an emergency management and so I was glad to have hired, like I said, those CPAs and auditors and lawyers, and as well as those subject matter experts like Randall that we were talking about that just can, speak PA literally in his sleep. And you guys will all get there for sure. But I think looking at those less traditional emergency management or disaster recovery fields, they're complementary, and I think we need to just help educate them about the opportunities.
So, yeah, curious about Tetra Tech. So they're an engineering firm that does obviously, ventures in EM, along with other ventures like you mentioned, like nuclear power and waste and stuff. So they do many different things besides EM, as opposed to like firms that are primarily focused on just EM, like Haggerty, IAEM, Ashburn, etc. Pretty much. Yes. Okay.
We are, and so, but 1,000-person disaster recovery practice is pretty large. That's larger than a Haggerty or an ACDC. Maybe a little bit larger maybe than a tidal basin, but IEM has been a really, purely EM company in this space for a long time. So what you'll know, like with Tetra Tech, is we have a core executive who has been for 20 years, who's been doing debris projects for 20 years. And companies will buy you, spin you off, make you something else. At one point they were even a part of SAIC, the big defense contracting firm. And so you'll see that a lot of large companies will see the margins and see just the opportunity in disaster recovery and want to get into that world and make an acquisition. And sometimes it works really well, and sometimes it's just a really uncomfortable partnership for a little while. But I think engineering is a much more complementary practice to disaster recovery. We regularly work with engineers and architects in the course of rebuilding, and they get that we kind of speak a lot of the same language. With this more recent funding streams, non-FEMA funding streams, they're looking at it too. I mean, we had a meeting with our group president on Friday just to help identify all the different infrastructure opportunities that are in this most recent funding bill. And so where we'll see, more traditionally, it would be just a pure infrastructure group that would be separate from us. They really see a lot of this funding as us being complementary to them, because we're the state and local guys. When a large federal grants come through, it's usually disaster recovery, state and local, my group that gets involved. And so we're really working together. I think we're seeing a lot of cross-discipline sharing of experience and just partnerships than we ever have before, and we need to do that. And so it's a different mix. I don't know if I would have gone with a small, just me personally, because I wasn't looking, it would have been different if I was out there and really, actively wanting to be a pure an EM purist, and stay in this world. But hasn't been my path to this job, to the previous job. It's been a mixture of disciplines within kind of big disaster response and recovery, say complementary, but just not really that pure. And so I find you humble, traditional EM firms maybe, in a little bit of that same box of the grant programs that and kind of your bread and butter. Whereas if you're almost a teaming partner or an add-on to a larger firm like an engineering firm, we tend to be a little hungry still, which is wild to be a 20,000 traded company. And they're just saying, yeah, go, pedal to the metal, find opportunities. So that was what was exciting for me. I think it's the right fit with the culture of the company, is more so what you have to look for. And really you have to find what brings those core competencies to your clients too. So what they need. And it's been so odd this past year that they kind of like that you bring some maybe non-traditional experience to the table, because they don't quite know what they're going to do with their $1 billion either.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So if you can just with wastewater plan, bring in your engineering group to help plan a broadband project in the, rural parts of your county, that's just a neat add-on that you can bring.
Sure. I'm curious, having worked in state government for around 20 years, like you mentioned, and then going into the private sector, did you notice many differences in like culture, workplace dynamics, organizational dynamics. I mean, like anything really noticeable in stark contrast sort of way?
So I think it's funny, we've been activated in the state of Florida, physically in the State Emergency Operations Center since March 1st of last year. And so very busy, had to be available 24/7. Director Moskowitz is a very demanding boss. And so would have to be available really 24/7. I mean, if he was, up late reading some things and had a question, he really wanted you to answer his phone call or on weekends or anything like that. So I was just extremely busy, and I expected that to keep up. I've always heard, being in state government, that, oh, but you have no idea how it really is in the private sector, oh, you state employee, kind of the old jokes of, you take it easier in government jobs than you would in the private sector. And I kind of had that in the back of my mind. I knew I never had a real cush job in state government. I was wondering, who has cush jobs? Who has these jobs where you can, go missing on Friday afternoons or something like that. I never had that experience in government. I don't know who did. But really getting into private sector, I thought it was just going to be as fast paced and as demanding. And I find the work-life balance much better. Really, there's just a more of a respect for my time. And just a much better, more respectful work environment as far as work-life balance. We find it's important. What we do is important, and we know that, and we're very responsive to our clients, but it seems to be a more traditional working environment and more traditional working times. So that's been surprising. I will say it was a little surprising, but very nice. And so much more focus on wellness. I know this is an odd kind of offshoot of that. But you eat very poorly for the most part in a state EOC, and you drink a lot of coffee, and you just aren't in the healthiest space. And my Tom, you weren't in the healthiest space. And so it's really nice to see. Also, my company seems to really respect and appreciate whole wellness. We can take time and go to a Orange Theory class, or hop on your Peloton, or go for a run or something like that. And it's perfectly acceptable. And that's wonderful. Wonderful to see and experience. It's unexpected.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm sure that's very helpful insight for many of us soon to be, working adults to keep in mind, depending on what paths our careers take. So thank you for that. Would anyone else like to ask anything? Don't be shy, guy. The floor is totally open.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll ask something else. What was the most notable disaster you ever helped respond to? Was it Michael, you'd say?
I'd still say Katrina.
Okay.
Yeah, I would. Michael was really devastating, was so powerful, but it was so compact of a storm. One of the things that surprised me about Hurricane Michael is it almost was like just a tornado came all the way through, and it was a very compact space. Very devastating, but it wasn't as widespread. And so I think what was so transformative about my experience with Katrina is it just highlighted some systemic problems, at every level of government, at city, state, federal, at just every level. And so it was challenging, in just the facts of the storm were hard. I sat in the state EOC and watched the first flyovers as the levees broke. We all did. I mean, we were kind of frozen, honestly, in the state EOC, watching this on the news, on TV. And so, and just recognizing that was just a historic change in that whole area, that area would never be the same from that point on. So it was difficult. I mean, and that lasted, they were still, that was August 28th, the storm hit. Probably 2 days later, is when the water really started filling into the city. And really, I went September 11th, and they were still launching boats from parts of New Orleans. So it was a lot longer lasting than people can imagine. And so just the volume, I mean, I flew in a helicopter that on that September 11th day down into New Orleans. And just as the sun was coming up, what I thought was a road and what was glistening off of a road was just a sea of water, and so it was just surprising at the scale. And what was great though is that it really did mark a change in how FEMA does business and the seriousness with which local governments take disaster planning. I think more so than anything. I think it wasn't necessarily an afterthought, but I think a lot of the doomsday scenarios that all of us kind of envisioned, including this pandemic, honestly, were just always seen as outliers and just so outrageous that they would never happen. And but I think Katrina kind of showed, at least to me, that they happen and that you have to take those seriously. And I think it did. I think it brought a gravitas to the whole planning and preparedness world that we'd never had before, thankfully. And so that was the most significant. I mean, my agency had never heard of EMAC. We didn't know how to get assistance from another state agency out of state other than calling if we knew the colonel of the head of the Tennessee State Patrol. We went ask. Didn't know there was a framework. Didn't know that there were already, the legal framework and the processes and all that in place to get that. We quickly learned, but it was a lot of learning on the fly. Some preparedness and some training and some outreach would have shaved off a little bit of time, a little bit of questioning, a little bit of research. I think just knowing authorities is what was so wild. And a little bit is my legal background, but a little bit of it is just basic. Who's responsible for what? That really highlighted that you have to know who's got it and who doesn't. And so, no, it was my first one, but it was a heck of a first one. So, it definitely sticks in my mind. But what's great is even if there's any of the ones that I experienced in Florida, it gave me a confidence. I mean, I know that I've experienced and answered questions and dealt with things during Hurricane Katrina that I'll never see again. And so it definitely gives me the confidence that I'll just come what may, like whatever happens, whether it is a Cat 5 Hurricane Michael or an Irma coming all the way up the peninsula or whatever it would be, just having experienced a bad one or really learning about a bad one gives you the confidence to just handle whatever happens.
Yeah, no, definitely a lot of lessons to be learned. From Hurricane Katrina for sure. And I'm sure a lot of things you faced, in your emergency management, related career after that seemed, not nearly as big as that. So that was kind of trial by fire for sure. I know. I saw that Will Garcia just joined. I know. Will, you might have some questions for Allison because Will's into engineering stuff a lot, and Allison, you're involved with Tetra Tech, so I don't know if Will's prepared for any questions, but I'll throw that up. I don't know if Will's there.
So Will, we were talking. Oh, he turned off his. So
I hear yes. I've worked with companies. I know companies like Tetra Tech do a lot of different work all across the globe. But no, I worked in a department of unexploded ordnance. Traveling around, and then I had been trying to look into more of the emergency management side since I was kind of doing this before I graduated, and that how companies like Tetra Tech, like how they apply emergency management to their companies.
Yeah, so in Tetra Tech, we have a couple of different practices. So I'm more in the traditional disaster recovery for about 1,000 people. Tetra Tech as a whole is about 20,000 employees. We have about 1,000 person disaster recovery practice. That includes CDBG, housing. We're doing a lot of these non-traditional programs that are being funded now, rental assistance, mortgage assistance, things like that. But FEMA PA, FEMA IA support, we're really, the DR practice is more traditional. There's more traditional programs. There's an EMI practice that's emergency management within Tetra Tech that does a lot of plan development, exercise development and execution, things like that you understand are more in the preparedness space. So think about us as more recovery and mitigation kind of together. We don't do a whole lot of response, believe it or not. We're not direct staff augmentation in EOCs or things like that. We surely could be. And that's one of the things that we're exploring now. And one of the things that while I was at Florida, we really heavily utilized, and Alex said, she's going to work for Haggerty. Haggerty was our staff augmentation assistance in the EOC. And that was invaluable. And so just when you have events, 380 days, you need that. And so even a state as capable as Florida needed that direct EOC staff augmentation. So really all aspects of emergency management, Tetra Tech does do that. What I was telling them is definitely in mitigation and recovery, the engineering, just complementary practice is really, really helpful. We don't go after a lot of business together, but once we're with a client, we love it. I'm also, have a big stormwater project and we can bring in our engineering practice. We help them identify the funding sources and we can manage those grants with them, but really can rely on other practice areas as the expertise and subject matter experts. And so that's the value of a large engineering company having a DR or an emergency management practice. I'm seeing that value more and more now that I'm in it. I really only ever hired and utilized when I was at DEM, the more traditional firms. We did have Atkins and Haggerty on staff, but then EY, we had dealing with the $10 billion, as I mentioned, compliance and those actually managing the funds is a huge aspect of that. So I hired the big accounting firms. So we had contracts with KPMG and Ernst & Young. Grant Thornton, RSM, or smaller or medium-sized ones, and then even local Florida firms like Thomas Howell Ferguson and Carwins and Ingram. So just really in the back end, my experience at the state was much more of the fiscal grant management aspect, and that's where we needed the most help. And that's where we had about 26 different contracts to all those people to manage disasters back to the 2004 season. So.
I see that. Okay, Will, if you want to say anything, go for it.
Oh no, yeah, no, that's amazing. That's what I was kind of trying to look up, and it's kind of been an issue with a lot of the other different companies, like just trying to find like emergency management jobs. But I'm kind of, I guess I have to narrow it down to like what are like some of the titles of I guess some of these more entry level positions for companies like Tetra Tech and these other consulting firms. In order to just be able to, find those positions that they're looking for those different emergency management aspects you mentioned.
Well, I definitely say just how we at Tetra Tech would do it is to get in touch with the recruiter, not necessarily look at a specific job. I mean, junior consultant or emergency management planner, those are some of the more entry level kind of titles, if I could name a couple, but really, get in touch with the recruiter and just see, they know their needs best. I mean, I know, like I said, we have about 200 openings in Tetra Tech right now. And they're called all sorts of different things across our different practice areas. When we are doing rental assistance, we spooled up a huge 40,000 square foot call center in Maitland, Florida, outside of Orlando, just to support rental assistance. And so some of those are customer service reps, but some of those are eligibility specialists, but that's really grant management. And then that's transferable over whether it's a rental program or FEMA PA or CDBGDR or any of those others. I mean, it's grant management. It's eligibility reviews based on some federal guidance. And so don't be too scared to apply for those that just seem really off and not EM necessarily. Just because all of the federal funds, as I was mentioning earlier, that are on the street right now, they're just so widespread and across so many different kinds of programs, but they still touch state and local government. And they're still a good skill set as far as grant management or management of federal programs or anything like that. And so definitely transferable, not the flashy response side necessarily. I realize, I'm going to be an advocate today for the boring, recovery and mitigation arm of EM. So it's definitely not going to be the flashy response side. But it really, I think you should know all aspects. Our director, or the guy who's going to be named the new director of the Florida Division of Emergency Management, is Kevin Guthrie. And he knows more. He's the executive that I've come across that knows more about recovery and mitigation than any other. And it's such a breath of fresh air. And he really said that he forced himself to do that, coming from a law enforcement background and a much more response-oriented background, because he said he realized that's how you pay for everything. Once you realize you do have to pay for this large-scale response, and that the rules are not always clear, and if they're not clear to him, they certainly won't be clear to a Gilchrist County, or who do I keep picking on, Sumter County. It won't be clear to them, but it needs to be. That's going to be what bankrupts a city, or you're not able to rebuild a new library because you didn't properly account for your force account labor. What a shame is that if you don't properly document something that was totally eligible that you should have been doing, that it's so much money out of pocket for these areas and these communities that you're not able to do a park or rebuild a school. I mean, that's heartbreaking for me. And that was always a big mission of mine, that I would never let that happen to anyone, to anyone, that if I could, just for the sake of not understanding a federal program or guidance. So.
Thank you, Allison. I really didn't know that, but yeah, any side I could be able to get into help would be great. I think they're all equally important, but thank you so much for the information.
No problem. And I'm happy to put in the chat, and definitely, Stefan has it. Would love to get, if any of you are still looking for positions or need guidance or anything, not only just mentorship and guidance, happy to answer any questions that you guys would have forevermore. But truly, if you're definitely still looking or interested, would be happy to help you.
Yeah, we can definitely give out your email or LinkedIn or something.
Yep. Yep. Feel free to share all the contact info that you have for me. Okay.
Great. Yeah, definitely will. And I saw that Ashley put in a question in the chat. She asked, what are some skills that you found to be helpful in your career?
So I definitely would say, and this is a hard one, it's not necessarily public speaking, but it's also, gosh, I'm going to butcher this because I don't have something canned. It's not anything that I think I can identify really clearly. I think you have to be a great listener. I think with a lot of these, you have to be able to identify the needs of these constituent groups, of these counties, private nonprofits, whomever. You have to truly listen to what they've done. You have to hear their story, hear them out, and then you can start asking the questions that you need to tick those boxes to see if what they're doing is eligible or what they've documented or anything like that. But really being an active listener is probably the best skill I could have. A lot of times even these county officials, even a mayor, I mean, they're overwhelmed, they're exhausted. If half their city is underwater, I mean, you have to hear them out. You really just have to have compassion and have to really actively listen to what they're going through. As a lawyer, look, I had to learn that skill a little. It's a skill I have to practice. I am a compassionate person and I want to help them, but I'm a little bottom line problem solver in me too, so really focus on that and try to become a real active listener and active participant in just hearing their disaster story. I think one of the most important things is I try to demystify these programs. So I try to explain very complicated programs and instill confidence in all of these officials that they can manage this, they can do this. So you're really a cheerleader or a supporter, of them and their skills, helping them identify what skill sets they might not have, if that can be supplemented with contract support or just a hire, or just say, hey, you may want to talk to your finance department and help get them spooled up on basics of PA so you can better explain it or better understand what they need to do. I explain disaster recovery to cops, and try to make, documenting what they did crisis time more burdensome in order for us to get money back, and just trying to be empathetic. And I think understanding what their job is and then try to help them understand how their job fits into that bigger picture, I think is just critical. So I know those are hard to explain. They're not really terms for those skills, but just discernment, and just a compassionate ear, but just really listen to what they're saying and try to pick out what are these eligible aspects, so you're going to know the programs, you're going to know the guidance, the federal regulations and all of that. Just really listen. They're relying on you to make sense of what they're saying. And so you be that translator for them. You translate their narrative of their dark and stormy night happening in Gilchrist County into something that's describing eligible activities and what documentation they might have showing what they did that night, to help get them some reimbursement, get them some funds to back into their communities and to help them recover. So I hope that answers your question. I know. Thanks, Ashley.
No, it's definitely helpful information for sure. So, well, would anyone else like to ask anything?
Could I say be an Excel guru as well? We tried to do access databases and all sorts of things. And and they're helpful, but managing, just really think of the skill set that you need to manage very large amounts of money. I felt ridiculous, managing $10 billion on Excel spreadsheets, and so, we bought some software and we have some great dashboards and some great reporting and some great compliance, software and all of this. But really the smart use of software is important, when I first got there and had to try to manage, $8 billion on spreadsheets, it was interesting.
I'm sure it was. Well, and would anyone else like to ask anything?
Yeah, I could ask another question.
Okay, great.
Well, I am graduating in 2 weeks with my master's degree in public administration and a concentration in emergency management. So, I've been looking for my next steps. I'm debating between AmeriCorps, for the, easy experience and other programs as well, but I hadn't really considered private sector up until this semester, probably. I'd always envisioned myself in a public servant, but you're right that, you can do public service in a private environment. And so I was just wondering how best to segue into the private sector. Like, what are your recommendations? Like, where should I be looking? What jobs, what roles?
So I think that you have all the skill set to support any type of response that they have. So different companies will be focused on different program areas. If they're more housing and infrastructure based, if that community resiliency is kind of where your heart you'd like to support, look for, honestly, for engineering firms or those who are more traditional in the housing space. If you're more response oriented and see yourself as doing staff augmentation, EOCs, and really direct support for either at the county or state level, both Hagerty and IAEM are both very active in those spaces, and we've had them both in our state EOC in Florida, and so they are both very active in that response space. Companies like Tetra Tech, I'd say that we're taking advantage more of that non-traditional, just new funding sources. We do PA all day, PA both in the debris aspect and then comprehensive grant management for a lot of clients. And so that's more, your rote, making sure that you have documentation and really just grant administration, on the FEMA PA side. Really on the new programs, it's being incredibly flexible. And so, yes, it's a traditional grant program, but we and companies like us who are administering this new assistance to create these programs from scratch with very little federal guidance. Treasury puts out like a 2-page fact sheet and then gives you $400 and says, go do good things. There's 4 requirements in the federal law and a 2-page fact sheet, and have at it. And so I find that exciting. I love problem solving like that. I really like that aspect of it. It's probably where I'm really excited to see for the next 6 months to 2 years, companies like ours, you do see, the Widow Bryans and Tetra Techs, and a little bit of Haggerty getting into those new programs, administering those. So I find that really exciting. Just really look to see what broad categories of work, kind of almost what discipline do you want to be doing? Do you want to be doing exercise design, and be more on the preparedness side? A big part of the new federal appropriation was $800 million to safer grants and EMPG, things like that. So there's going to be opportunities in every part of emergency management, whether it's that for preparedness, mitigation, CDBG, is getting a huge influx of money with this new appropriation. So it's infrastructure and housing. Response is always response, and that's always going to be fun. But you're going to be competing a lot with your traditional first responder types in the response space. So I don't often see a lot of just new fresh grads getting into that response space. Other than planners, the planning aspect of an EOC is its backbone. And I find, especially people with, fresh out of college or fresh out of a master's program, have those organization and analytic skills. And honestly, you don't need to really know what you're looking at. You just need to listen and plan for, and organize them. You don't even have to fully understand what they're doing. You just have to organize them. And there's a huge value in that. And so that planning aspect is a really great way to kind of come into a response if that's the part of emergency management you'd be interested in. And like I said, recovery, if you're just really, I thought it was really awesome to be able to say $10 billion, it's really something to be able, it was a huge challenge to properly administer $10 billion, to just get, and we paid right over $1 billion out in about 10 months, fully validated, fully checked, while COVID was going on in older FEMA PA reimbursements. So it's just scale when you get into recovery. And that's the case even at a local level. I mean, all of a sudden you might get your whole county's budget in a year, and so just that capacity building. And so that's just exciting sometimes. And
wow, yeah, thank you for all that insight. If James wants to follow up with anything, go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Planning is definitely something that I am really interested in. I'm great at hypotheticals, and I like to think that I'm good at considering not all, but most possible venues of what could go wrong. So I guess I'm a worrier. So,
you're in the right field. To think of everything that could possibly go wrong and then plan for it.
Exactly. It sounds good. So thank you so much, Allison. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
Okay. Well, would anyone else like to ask anything? Okay. Works for me. Well, thank you so much, Allison, for this extraordinary talk. I mean, so much insight and experience to learn from here. And we're going to have a recording of it up on our YouTube channel. If anyone missed it, you can soak it up later. And we'll definitely get your email and LinkedIn and all that stuff out to our students. They can connect with you further and hear from more insight or see what opportunities with Tetra Tech may be possible or whatever. So thank you once again. Round of applause for Allison.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for allowing me to come talk. It was so much fun. Like walk down memory lane and just to hear me just talk. So I appreciate it. Yeah,
you're welcome. Yeah, thank you so much for being our speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank you, Allison.
With everything, good luck with graduation, and definitely it's an exciting time. So have fun.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Bye, guys.